Mice at Center Ice, Chapter 12. The Hero Returns. Benny and the Big M rested happily against the bumper. As the truck left the dump behind, Benny looked at the moonlit landscape for what he hoped was the last time. "I've seen enough of the great outdoors," he confided. "So have I, for now," the Big M agreed. "Now it's on to the Cheddar Cup and victory." "We'll soon be home," murmured Benny in utter contentment. The truck joggled comfortably through the brightly lit streets. Neon signs blinked on and off. Lighted displays glowed inside store windows. Then, up ahead, Benny saw the lights of the Forum. "That's it!" Benny cried, grabbing the Big M and shaking him. "That's the Forum! We're home!" The truck jolted to a stop beside the familiar waste disposal bin in the back door. "Come on!" cried Benny. "Let's get out of here before we end up back in the garbage bin." They scrambled down the side of the truck to the street below, through the open door, and into the Forum. For a moment Benny was overcome with emotion. Everything looked exactly as it always had. The crowds shouted and cheered. The Canadians whizzed across the ice, blades flashing, sticks crashing, bodies bruising. With deep satisfaction, Benny breathed in the familiar air. It was charged with excitement. There was no place on earth quite like home, he thought. He couldn't wait to introduce his new friend to Pepe and Figaro. The Big M followed him through the corridors and tunnels that ran between the spaces in the walls. At last they reached the home team locker room. It was empty. "Funny," Benny mused. "Well, maybe the other mice are watching the game. That's where we get the best food, up in the stands." The big mouse nodded. He closed his eyes and sniffed the air. "Smells like hockey," he said. He opened his eyes and looked around the room. He saw the sweaters, sticks, gloves, shin pads, and old sneakers. "Comfortable," he said slowly. "Very comfortable. It beats the watchman's shed, although I did enjoy his hot stove." "We have a hot stove league here, too," Benny said eagerly. "It's upstairs, near the broadcasting booth. The players and experts sit around after games. They talk about what the teams did wrong, who was to blame for all the bad plays, the referee, and stuff like that. We don't go upstairs very often." The Big M nodded. "I suppose there's no need for it," he said. "You have everything you need right here." Benny cleared his throat. Maybe it was time to tell the Big M a little more about the rink rats. "Here's our waiting room." Benny zipped it through the knothole in the floorboards. "We spend a lot of time in here waiting. We have to wait for the Canadians to leave every night. Sometimes they take forever." Pepe and Figaro weren't in the waiting room. Benny led the way to the tunnel by the floorboard hole. "How do you know where you're going?" asked the Big M. "You'll get used to it," said Benny. "We have the run of the place, except for the visiting team's dressing room. That's where the rink rats hang out. You'll have to steer clear of them. Mostly they stick to their business, and we stick to ours. Except now, their business is our business. They stole the Cheddar Cup from us." "Stole the Cheddar Cup?" Benny nodded. "In my grandfather's time. But we managed to get it out of the rink rat's secret room the night of my adventure. Pepe and Figaro were in charge of rolling the cup back to our side of the Forum. I tried to sidetrack the rink rats by running in the opposite direction." "Well, what happened then?" "I'm not sure," said Benny, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "We had the cup in the outer tunnel. The heist was going just as planned. Then I ended up taking a wrong turn and landed out on the ice. That's when I tangled with the Zamboni. You know the rest." The Big M nodded. "Pepe and Figaro might have had time to roll the cup back when the rats were chasing me," said Benny. "By now, reinforcements should have arrived. We advertised for mouse hockey players for the championship Cheddar Cup game." Benny and the Big M had entered the long tunnel beyond the waiting room. In the distance they heard the low murmur of voices. There was a crack of light beneath the floorboards. "Follow me," ordered Benny, the bullet. They entered the room by a large knot-hole. Then Benny sat perfectly still. He stared at the strange scene before him. His heart beat faster. The cheddar cup sat in the middle of the tunnel. Pepe and Figaro had managed to roll it back home. Pepe Lapierre, Figaro the flyer, Anne-Marie, and several other mice stood beside Benny's hockey stick. It had been propped up in a crack in the floor. Benny's red, blue, and white number 9 sweater was draped over the marker. Figaro spoke in his most eloquent voice. I shall now read the inscription to our beloved and dearly departed friend, Benny the Bullet. In loving memory, here lies the spirit of Benny the Bullet, our captain, who disappeared in the great Zamboni machine. He was a great hockey player and a good, true friend. Anne-Marie wrote rapidly in the notebook. Pepe Lapierre sniffed loudly, and Raffaella held a handkerchief to her eyes. This jolted Benny in his senses. Hold it! Benny shouted, running over to the marker. What's going on here? Pepe and Figaro were stunned. Raffaella stopped crying. Anne-Marie crumpled the notepaper she had been writing on, but not before Benny read the headline. Mice mourn untimely death of Benny the Bullet. You're alive, Figaro said softly. You're alive. A ghost! Cried Pepe. Mon Dieu! He crossed himself. I'm not a ghost, cried Benny, stamping his foot. I'm alive and well, as you can see. What are you doing holding a funeral service for me? It was a beautiful funeral. Pepe wiped tears from his eyes. You should have been there. Benny was touched in spite of himself. Sorry I missed it. Maybe next time. Figaro gave the most beautiful eulogy. Actually, it was from Grand Opera, said Figaro modestly. He grabbed Benny and kissed him on both cheeks. But I meant it, nevertheless. Every single word right from the heart. It was a work of art, said Raffaella admiringly. Stuff and nonsense, Benny said gruffly. He yanked his sweater off the marker, pulled it over his head, and wiped his nose on the sleeve of his sweater. Rats, he muttered. I'm not ready for the great beyond yet. Pepe and Figaro were overcome with emotion. Here, Benny said, quickly changing the subject, meet our new defenseman, the Big M. Not related to the famous Big M, the hockey player by any chance? Pepe asked. One and the same, the Big M said proudly, adjusting his spectacles. And I'm here to help you get back the Cheddar Cup. Benny looked pleased with his new discovery. I hope so, he commented. We certainly need all the help we can get.